come from, what they actually believe, how the people who argue it, why they believe it, and how they argue it, and so on. So you need to, I had to give you I couldn't give you the full vaccination course, but I gave you a good initial COVID vaccination. No, maybe not like the COVID vaccination, but but something that actually works. Okay, khair inshallah. So this initial session before the breakfast starts will be maybe Q&A. We can recap what we discussed. Next session, we will just briefly discuss proving how to discuss Islam, inshallah. So, would anyone, does he have a microphone? Please.
The whole section of neo-Darwinism, when we spoke about the race theory, something is popping up in South Africa, especially in this world, because of obviously post-apartheid and
yeah.
You see many people come up with this, what's it called, radical race theory or
a critical race theory. Yes.
So if you can just explain to us what the theory actually says, and then maybe how do we resume to the, and how do we pick up those ideas in the discourse when people, how do we identify the places where they're coming from?
Okay, so one of the problems I've encountered when I challenged critical race theory was they say, oh, you're challenging critical race theory, you're a racist. Because critical race theory just is against racism. So why are you challenging it? And of course, oh, you're challenging feminism? Oh, you hate women, you're a misogynist, because feminism is meant to be about giving women's rights. Oh, you hate Marxism, communism, you hate poor people, because communism is about liberating the poor people and giving them their rights. And so on and so forth. It's like, look, I'm against hating women, hate racism, but your solution is not the solution for it, right? That's the approach, right? Because they present it as we have the only solution. No, you don't. Islam has, right? Islam is the only reason, the only way you're going to defeat an asabiyya, like grouping together. My tribe is better than your tribe. Or no, asabiyya is more like I care about my tribe, my nation, my block of the street, my side of the city, my town, my province, better than yours, right? Asabiyya, you can't defeat it with anything other than revelation. Why anything other higher meaning? Because if you can't tell people, oh, why are you supporting? It's like telling someone, you know, why are you supporting your tribe or nation or football team or anything like this? No offense to those who are supporting Arsenal or Manchester United or anything like this, but it is bad. No, I'm joking. No. So just to be, it's not a problem to support a football team, just support Arsenal. But anyway, no. Okay. So you can't defeat it with materialistic arguments, because ultimately it's people's desires, that it's not rational, and you have to give people a reason why they shouldn't, right? Why they shouldn't. So if I went to Elon Musk and said, look, Elon Musk, you know, stop being a racist. I mean, okay, Allahu Alam if he truly is, for the purposes of legal cases. But let's say he was, right? Let's say he wasn't just saying hi to the audience after the Trump victory, front and back, you know, he was doing something else. How would you persuade him? Because as far as he's concerned, he says, well, I might, the hypothetical Elon Musk, he'll say, well, I think, you know, I feel better with my own race, white Afrikaners, and I think that Africa was better under the apartheid, or I feel more comfortable with people that look like me. So how are you going to destroy that? Or that's silly, that's stupid. And it's like, why? It's how I feel. I follow my emotions, my desires, you know, just like you follow your desires for everything else. How can you tell materialists who believe that life is about following your desires to go against your desires if they're racist? You understand? Because they say, well, it's my preference, right? I prefer to be with people that look like me. So I have a preference for eating biltong, or I have a preference for eating, you know, I prefer chicken over beef or whatever. Like they say, I should, why can't I follow my preferences? Yeah. So if you don't bring in revelation, you don't bring in purpose of life, you don't bring in any higher meaning, you can't argue against that. So the problem with critical race theory was it can't really defeat it. But what is it, was your question, and I'll be very quick. Critical race theory is an attempt to explain why there's racism, I suppose is the better way of describing it. And it tries to have a solution from its Marxist DNA. So it says, where does racism come from? Racism comes from the language, culture, laws, and institutions of a society, right? And yes, but what if you've eliminated all the racist laws, you've eliminated racist language, or you say at least you can't use racist language, right? And you've banned hate speech, you've done all this stuff, but there's still racism. Then they say, but that's because racism is like, it's hidden in the culture and language of the people in a hidden way. And I say, okay, where, point me to it, please. I want to see. And I say, no, it's just hidden. And it manifests itself through racist behaviors, attitudes, and so on. And I say, the reason why they say that is because Karl Marx said that the ideology of the economic system, so the economic system is racist, the ideology be racist, and neo-Marxists say the ideology is racist, can hide itself in law and so on and so forth, even if you can't see it. It's like a ghost. Even though they're materialists, they believe in it as ghost, and that's where racism comes from. And I say, no, I have a better answer for you. Racism comes from Jahiliyyah, the Jahil mindset of people. Right? Everyone, every civilization, every tribe, every people on planet Earth, I've seen kibr from, and asabiyya. It's like it's spontaneously generated, just like lying. Where does lying come from? Or is the child taught to lie? No, anyone who has kids will know, as soon as they can talk, and they realize that if they say something, they don't get a cookie. If they say something else, they get a cookie. They'll say that's something else, right? Even if it's not true, yeah? So it happens, it arises. Have you seen kids on the playground saying, hey, you've got big ears, you look funny, or like, look at you got a big head, look at this. So they start making fun, my head's not big as yours, or I'm better than you. Yeah, you see kids do that? Yeah, because it arises in Jahiliyyah and ignorance. It's a typical thing that arises in human beings and in jinn, of course, as well, right? You're not going to defeat it by pretending it comes from somewhere else, some hidden ghostly structure or somewhere like this. But that's critical race theory, because Marxism doesn't believe in that humans can cause evil. It believes evil comes from the system. That's what makes humans evil. That's a false assumption. Humans can be evil or good. They don't need to be caused to do it, right? Okay. And of course, then they have their solutions are, remember when I told you about socialists and Marxists? The way you have to balance power and make everyone absolutely equal on every metric, right? So that means they have to make sure that so they'll be talking about race quotas. There must be race quotas no matter what. It doesn't matter. We'd say, look, we understand there is disproportionate hiring of, let's say, South Africans. I'm going to make it relevant to you guys, because usually I talk about this in England, I talk about American context, Canadian context. But here, obviously, it's a different situation. It's the majority that have been treated unjustly, whereas in America and in Canada, these are the minorities, right? So this is it's a bit different here because of the situation. But a critical race theorist will still say that South Africa is racist against black people, even if the government is ANC. It's, I don't think they are white supremacists. I don't think. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. Yeah. So they'll say the way to create equality is you must have race quotas. And we say, look, I understand that in the past, because there was disproportionate education and infrastructure was invested in the white South Africans, that this has led to the black majority having to catch up, and it's going to take a long time to catch up. And the best way to do that is not by saying we must have mandatory race quotas for jobs, but rather say we have to invest heavily in education system, in apprenticeships, and so on, bringing up the majority up to speed, you could say, from all those decades or centuries of neglect and no investment. So you have to let's heavily invest to bring them up, to build up their skills so that they can be competitive in the job market. But you can't give jobs if you have two candidates and one is objectively better because they have more experience, they've done more, they have more qualifications, whatever stuff. I said, no, I'm not going to give it to you. I have to give it to this other person. And there's an example of this. Umar radhiyallahu anhu said that if a person is put into position because of some relation of family or tribe or some preference, and there's someone else that is better for the job, then they have betrayed Allah, His Messenger, and the believers, right? So how we viewed politics was, and positions and things like this was, it has to be meritocracy. But it doesn't mean now you say, well, I'm not going to do anything about the unjust society that was created by this. No. And an example of this was when the Muhajirin came to Medina, they were foreigners. They didn't have any well, some had some family ties, but they had no money, they had nothing, right? So what did the Ansar do, right? They gave them, you know what, you have nothing here, we're going to give you, there was an Ansar who had 2 wives. He said, you know what, pick which one you think is more beautiful and you marry. I'll divorce her, you marry her, right? So, and when there was new tribes becoming Muslim, right? And when Muslims had you know, let's say they fought a battle and they got some fa'i, war booty and some you know, resources for after the battle, they would give that resources to the new tribe of people who just became Muslim. And some people said, oh, you know, why are you giving, you know, like you're giving it to them, but like, what do we have as the Ansar? We were helping you. And you say, you have Allah and His Messenger. So Allah and His Messenger go home with you, right? Whereas these new tribe, they need these new resources because they're new to Islam. So in Islam, we totally understand and have used the solution of giving resources to those who need it more than others. Not saying, no, everyone must be treated equally, whether you're a new Muslim tribe or not, or if you're imagining one side, everyone must divide their wealth equally. No. These people need it more, give it to them. Right? So that would be the solution. Critical race theory doesn't, I mean, they wouldn't say they're not against that, but they'd say, no, race quotas, you must have race quotas because the power structure must be equally balanced between, and every job and every middle class position, you must make sure there's absolute race quotas. They did the same with gender quotas too, as well. In England, what they did, they said all the executive boards, you must have 50% women in company boards and so on and so forth, right? 50% women, 50% women must be equal. Oh, but what about like, you know, sewage cleaning? 50% women quotas? Oh, no, nothing. All right. Bomb disposal, 50% women? Oh, no. Okay, no, none of that. It's quiet, right? Women only for the high jobs, not for the lowly jobs that men also do. So that's critical race theory and neo-Marxist feminists. So it doesn't work those things. And it also makes people angry and upset. They'll say, that's not fair. I'm a qualified. Why do I have to give why do I have to get turned down because of my color when I wasn't responsible for whatever, right? So anyway, and there's another verse called no soul shall bear the burden of the others, right? So you can't blame one individual. Say, no, but there were people that had the same skin color as you that did some really bad things, so you have to pay for it. It's like, what? I didn't. I'm even Russian, but anyway, you know, I'm not even. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the thing. So that's not how we approach in Islam. Any other questions or anything on what we discussed about political solutions or about what we discussed in these theories and things?
From an LGBTQ perspective, how do we respond? I've heard Ustadh's response, but just for the benefit of everyone, I think it's a unique response to the question of LGBTQ. How do we frame our response?
Sure. Well, if you're talking about neo-Marxists or woke, right, and So, I mean, I'm sure most of you don't really care about watching Disney movies and things, but you might have seen. I mean, obviously, I keep up to date with what you might call cultural developments in the West. Obviously, purely for dawah reasons, of course, I studied. No, but you see a lot of people criticizing Disney's movies going downhill, right? They say the Disney movies going right downhill. Like, for example, they had because they have to have inclusion and they have to show lesbianism and same-sex couples and so on. They also like redid the Little Mermaid, I think it was, as a cartoon, and the original cartoon, the mermaid was white, I suppose, and then they portrayed her as a black character, so on and so forth. And they said, well, you know, what's wrong with this? It's just inclusion and so on. And people said, look, yeah, this is a fantasy. It's a fantasy thing, yes, but if the mermaid is like underwater, deep down underwater where there's no sunlight, we wouldn't expect them to have melanin, I think. It doesn't like make sense. It's like, oh, it's a fantasy. Why are you complaining? I say, okay, but at least some sense making would be required, or you know, disproportionate gay couples and things like this. So the reason why, oh yeah, gender switching. So they'd have an old movie and they'd remake it, and if it was a hero was a man, they'd make it into a woman, and so on. They did it. This is all deliberate strategy. They say we have to change the culture in order to create equality. Sometimes neo-Marxists or woke are called cultural Marxists because they say we have to make the culture equal, and then the economic system will become equal. That will have where our Marxist revolution will come about. So we have to change the culture. But that's in essence, I suppose, a way of putting it. So they'll say the reason why there's homophobia is because you haven't normalized it. So we have to normalize it. So we have to make sure that you see more homosexuality. Kids are exposed to it. There should be children's books that show homosexuality as normal, same-sex couples, same-sex marriage are equally valid families as opposite-sex marriages. This is what they would say. Even though you can't say, well, they would say, I mean, because LGBT peoples, quote unquote, have been historically persecuted and marginalized and so on and so forth. So we have to redress the balance, even though they're not like a typical minority where you might say 10% of the population, 15%, 5%, but much, much, much smaller than that. But they say it doesn't matter. We have to portray them on TV almost as if they're 50% of the population, because you have to make people see them as equally valid lifestyle, right? So that's what woke tends to do. Liberal LGBT individuals might simply just say, we just want gay marriage to be legalized, and adoption agencies to give children to gay couples, and we don't want to be discriminated in the workplace, and that's it. That's pretty much it. We won't go beyond that. But the neo-Marxists would say, no, we have to check, we have to re-engineer the culture to make sure that it is not fully normalized, and to look at heteronormative laws. It's called heteronormative, is their name for patriarchy or white supremacy. So the critical race theory will say, we're not fighting, it's not the workers against the bourgeois, against the white supremacy. And the feminists will say it's the women against patriarchy. And the LGBT guys will be, well, queer theory, right? Queer theorists will say it's LGBTQ and yeah, LGBTQI and whatever, against heteronormativity, right? So that's their fight. But by the way, they don't necessarily dispute with each other, saying that like if you are campaigning against white supremacy, that you don't believe in the patriarchy. They might say, I'm focusing on this lens of race. You can focus on gender. I can support normative, ableist, because able-bodied and all this stuff, you know, unfair society and so on and so forth. So that's basically what the woke does. And many people fall into it because they think it's justice, because they say, look, we hate racism. Well, I hate racism too. Okay, then you must join us, because we are the only ones that can fight against it. And I say, and some, I'm not saying they're not good intentions, they just don't know any better. All right, for the most part, they don't know any better, because non-Muslims, they don't have any guidance. And some, unfortunately, Muslims don't know any better, and they follow them, because we didn't tell them what Islam says, how Islam solve this problem. Say, well, the problem is nation states. The problem is you think that you only have this life, and you think that your shahawat is the thing that is your God. So you can't get rid of racism like this, right? Only when you realize that it's meaningless, because we're all Bani Adam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us, and He doesn't care what color skin you have, and you should fear the judgment that will separate people into the two shades, those whose faces have been brightened because they go into Jannah, and those faces that are darkened because they're going to Jahannam, right? Right? And there'll be white people, darkened faces going to Jahannam, and there'll be black people with lightened faces going to Jannah. So it's not the skin color, right? So fear Allah, what the shade He's going to give you on the day of judgment, so to speak. Anyway, so that's how I respond to it. That's what I say. So yeah, brother in the back, and then you.
Upon us in our time to reconfigure ideas that were talked about in such as Khilafah, considering the fact that our world since the last Khilafah drastically changed, especially for a community like that of Cape Town, which is quite different to the north of the country. Cape Town, the Muslims in Cape Town are organically part of the country. In other words, no one can tell them to go back to India. They are part of the country. And at the same time, for them to be part of the Ummah, part of the Khilafah, it would be unreasonable for one to argue that they should join part of a continuous territorial state that is part of the Khilafah. So how is it that we can be part of the Ummah while at the same time being part of another part of the world? Because Muslims in Cape Town are organically part of the state. And just another question to add to that, with regards to Muslims constitute a significant part of the population, and they are important to most political parties, and are a swing vote, you could say. Therefore, a number of parties, particularly liberal parties, are seeking out Muslim leaders within the community, although the Liberal Party is, with all its faults, especially in Cape Town, where they are overtly Zionists. So should they simply just avoid it and say, as long as there are particular sickness of Zionism is there, we won't join? Or can we say, like Sheikh Abdullah said, as long as they do good, we support them with the good that they're doing and be part of the party? Or look for an alternative and try to find a way?
Okay, so these are very specific questions, and it's good. So the first question, when I talk about this is called the Jama'ah. The Jama'ah is not a spiritual Jama'ah. It literally means, like the Jummah prayer is a prayer where and a jam, and the Khilafah simply means, and the Khalifa is simply the successor to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not in his capacity as a prophet, but in his capacity as the Imam of the Jama'ah. So without that, we are defenseless. The Rasulullah said, the Imam is a shield behind which the Ummah fights and defends itself. It's our immune system. It's the way and you can see what it looks like today when we lose our immune system, right? It's we are a body that has acquired AIDS, as you might say. AIDS, when your immune system is compromised and you can no longer defend yourself against a simple cold, right? That's what now everyone can invade us. Israel bombarding, killing us like nothing. We have those who might not be, in theory, they're not publicly, let's say, saying they're non-Muslim, but they pretty much act like Israel anyway, like UAE, massacring our brothers and sisters in Sudan. 30,000 Sudanese Muslims massacred, right, in one area, right? I think they've killed more people. I mean, Allahu Alam, because we don't know how many people have been killed in Gaza, but certainly the UAE supported RSF are certainly they seem to be competing with Israel how many Muslims they can kill. So when I talk about Khilafah, the Khilafah is the Rasulullah he said that he's only responsible for, in terms of politically, for those who come to Medina and join the Muslims. For the Muslim Bedouin out about, obviously, if they don't come, then they have their own responsibility for themselves, but because they're outside the jurisdiction. Now, Khilafah is for the areas of the Muslim world where Muslims rule. Right? It's for uniting the Muslim world. It's not for South Africa because it's a majority non-Muslim country. I mean, they're not going to accept it. Why would they accept it? So here, one of the primary missions of us here is we invite non-Muslims to Islam. Right? That's our primary mission here, is to invite non-Muslims to Islam, but not simply just as a belief system, but also as a comprehensive way of life. You know, when the Rasulullah was searching for somewhere to seek refuge from the people in Mecca, when he had lost his protection and you know, he knew they're going to try to kill him, and he goes to the different tribes and he invites them to Islam, and maybe, you know, some of them say, well, we'll think about it or we'll consider. But he asked, would you at least allow me protection in your tribe, in your area, and allow me to give da'wah, right? So even if you don't accept it right now, allow me, basically, you know, allow him to give da'wah and be protected while he does so. And if they accept, they accept. If they reject, they reject. But at least they don't persecute him for calling to Islam. So here, he didn't say, okay, you know, you're not Muslim, but I want you to establish the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't believe in the laws of Allah. So here, you're not here to establish a khilafah in South Africa or join it to a khilafah. But if the dawah is so successful that you get a significant majority of people in South Africa to be Muslim, and if we can establish the khilafah in the Muslim world and reunite the Muslim world, then of course, obviously, it can join, you know, the wider Muslim ummah in political unity. But no, no one's talking about establishing khilafah in non-Muslim countries. I don't talk about establishing khilafah in UK or in Canada or anything like this, right? But if they become majority Muslim, well, then we can talk about this, right? Obviously, what they're going to rule then by? Then the majority, they rule the land, ruling according to what? All right. Now, when you give dawah to Muslims, all I'm going to advise you is simply saying is a holistic dawah. Because you know when the Aus and Hazraj, the two tribes of Yathrib, approached the Rasulullah, they were desperate for a solution, a political solution. They were fighting and killing each other for ages, right? They had the battle of Buath, which was a massacre. I mean, it was a bloody battle between them. Most of their nobles were wiped out. Right, so there was a lot of them was mostly youth now. Maybe that made them ready to accept something new. Maybe Allahu Alam, you know, obviously Allah knows His plan in His wisdom better. But the Rasulullah didn't just say, okay, well, here's a political solution for you. No, he said Islam is the solution, right? And Islam can stop your fighting, and Islam is the truth, and this is the Quran is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he recited it and then they heard it. So he gave them a full dawah, a comprehensive dawah. And subhanAllah, many people became, even in England, some people become Muslim because of the solutions, the political solutions, the economic solutions that Islam gives. Just to give you an example, you're looking at one. Just on the issue of the hijab, it made me interested about Islam. Because I was a young lad and obviously filled with hormones and obviously, I was about 13, 14, as I was encountering this and thinking about it. But I asked myself, why does Islam, okay, all these religions talk about praying and who you're praying to and when you pray in the rituals. Why does Islam want women to wear hijab, not just like in the mosque, in the masjid, but outside the masjid, like in society? What's going on? And I was thinking about this, like, why does Islam, want this? For what reason? The more I thought about it, it's like, oh, wait a second. It seems like Islam wants to remove sexual tension and sexual politics and all this stuff from society, like so that you can actually work and do your business without thinking about these things, which are not really helpful, right, in society. Oh, that makes sense. That deals with human nature. Oh, Islam has solutions for human nature and human affairs. That's exactly what I expect from a purpose of life. If something is the purpose of life of humans, it should concern every aspect of their life, right? So that wasn't what made me Muslim, but that got me really interested. Like, oh, let me learn more now. What's more is it saying now? Right? So all I'm saying is, in terms of sorry I've given you a long answer, but I want to give you a detailed one. Is the dawah should be holistic. Why not, instead of just telling South Africans, that let's say they're Christian, that not to worship Jesus and only worship God and Jesus, and to love the real Jesus and understand who he is, but also say, by the way, your day-to-day problems, here how they can be solved. The political problems, the corruption problems in South Africa, here's how they can be solved, all right, by Islam. Here's some, and that requires you to study details as well. You need to learn details. What does an Islamic economic system look like? How would you have a dynamic system without riba? If you don't have the answer to that, then someone's going to ask you. They're going to ask you. If you don't have the answer to that, then they think Islam doesn't have the answer, right? So you need to know. And I've done some lectures online. You can Google. It's on YouTube. The economic system of Islam. I've discussed it in detail. I compare it to liberalism and to communism. So anyway, that's the first question, hopefully addressed. The second one is what you do with these different parties. Now, I would say every party has an aqidah, right? It's manifesto. It's based on an ideology or something like this that it believes in. You can't be part of a party that where its members are expected to believe in these ideas, right? And it looks like when you join them that you believe in those ideas. So, I might be a card-carrying member of the Marxist Party and I give donations to them and all this, but it doesn't mean I believe in Marxism. Like, what? Why are you joining them then? Why? Because it seems to everyone here that you're saying that Marxism is the solution because you've joined the Marxist Party, for example. Like you're bearing testimony with your membership. Yeah. Even if you're saying, but I'm just pretending, but in my heart, I don't believe in it. Well, okay, but that's not what you're publicly announcing when you carry your card around and you join the marches and carrying the red flags. Let's just say as an example. So you can't join these parties, but you can collaborate with it for good causes. That was my point yesterday. You can collaborate with good causes. Let's say if there was I suppose the question you might want to, I'm going to maybe give a hypothetical to ask myself, which is, what if there was, I don't know, orphanage and a Zionist wanted to invest and asked you to help him invest in it and he's a Zionist, what to do? Should you say no because he's a Zionist? Or should you say, well, I don't care if you're a Zionist, but I only care about children, just as long as you don't say that this you put the Israeli flag on it and say this is, Zionism did this and Zionism is helping the children or whatever, because it's certainly not helping the children in Gaza. I would say that I would probably think I would probably say go after ask a mufti on this question, right? Because that's when I'm a da'i, not a mufti, and I can't give. All I can give you is the general principles, but there might be, if there's specific case, well, that's when you go to those who studied fiqh, and they will tell you the answer. The issues I can't tell you specific answers, but the general principle simply is cooperating the good, and you can cooperate with kuffar, you can cooperate with people you disagree with, but I suppose that there might be certain exceptions, but that's beyond my my pay grade, as they say, outside my pay grade to answer specific exceptional scenarios. Okay. So I think the brother at the front asked first and asked after him. So you go ahead, brother.
So,
I
I just wanted to find out what are some of the key factors and elements that maybe led to certain theories, certain madhabs to come to the fore or to be popular. sometimes you might think maybe this became more popular because it offered the best solution to that particular situation, or it could be maybe the resources that were put forward in terms of, let's say, money, human resources, and then push that particular theory or matter. My thinking is coming from the four madhabs that we have, the main madhabs, and understanding that there were more madhab from a field perspective than that you now have maybe certain students putting more effort to the spread of that particular madhab. So when it comes to these madhab from the West, what are some of the key factors that maybe brought it forward to be spread throughout the world?
Okay, Barakallah Feek, it's a very good question. There's ikhtilaf amongst historians as to, let's say, how liberalism got into power, because John Locke published his book on the very same year that the Bill of Rights in England is legislated, right? Pretty much, or the year, or even just the year before. But that's not for it to influence the law coming. So some people say, certainly Hegel, the philosopher Hegel, he believed that philosophy, these ideas come into existence after they already exist, and people just write a very detailed justification of the status quo. Like, they just explain why the way that things are working now is a good way, right? That's really what they're saying. So others say that no, it was some people like Marxism was advocated before it got into any kind of power, like in Russia and so on. So what's going on? I suppose it can depend. I think with liberalism, it was due to changes that were made, new ideas for specific solutions that were made gradually or introduced or argued for. Like, for example, so maybe the state should not care about the Catholic Church, what it's telling it to do, and should not persecute heretics, right? That was said for a couple hundred years before it finally started to become the law or England stopped doing that. Well, kind of. So it's an interesting question, because like, when did they say, well, we're liberal now, this is liberalism? Because liberalism only was only named liberalism after 1800s, the word invented, you understand? So this thing we're doing now, just call it liberalism, this is liberalism, that kind of stuff. So it's a very interesting question. So I think when it comes to the ideas, let's say liberalism as obviously a madhab, but a deen that's implemented, I think it was, the ideas were argued and presented before it got implemented, and maybe some states implemented some things first and not other things, and then they slowly changed until they become fully liberal, if you can call anything for liberal. And some other states it was more radical. So other states was, we've kicked out the king. England's liberal, so we have a model to copy. Let's copy England and establish it in East Europe or in France or wherever, and so on. Yeah, like for example, Napoleon Bonaparte, he's a liberal dictator. He conquers Europe, and then after he conquers the German states and so on, the Germans start talking about, well, look, the French are united under one French state. We should be united under one German state, and it should be a liberal state, because look at the ideas that Napoleon Bonaparte he brought to us: free press and freedom of speech to some extent, and all this kind of stuff. So they saw it being implemented and they copied it. So some people, the change was more like was rapid because they were copying an existing state. But England, you could say the first liberal state, it was more slight changes until they reached something called liberalism, and then the philosophers said, okay, this actually is how it should be, and we're going to make a very detailed system about why this is the way it is. I think in some ways, it's like, Imam Muwardi writes about, in his book, Ahkam al-Sultaniyya, right? So Imam Muwardi writes about the Abbasid Caliphate, but he writes about how, the Khilafah was already existing, but he writes about how Khilafahs work, what they're meant to work, what they're meant to do, what is the criteria to be a Khalifa, how the Khalifa appoints officers and ministers and wala on different provinces, and how this all worked. But this was already working. He just kind of wrote about it. That was what was already going on. So maybe it was like that for some things. But for Marxism, no, they said the ideas before it got, Marx didn't have any power. He just wrote the ideas. He died. His friend, who was a capitalist, well, you could say a rich factory owner, or moderately rich, published his works. The works became famous. Well, he was famous in his time anyway, amongst socialists. And then eventually it spread and it spread, and socialist parties took these ideas and they campaigned in Russia, and then they basically orchestrated revolutions and this kind of stuff. So for some people, the ideas were said first. A thinker took all these ideas together, said it, people loved it, and later on they took him after he passed away. They took it and they were successful, and they changed society. In other places, the madhabs developed because within a region, because of the historical issues that were happening there. People said, let's solve this problem this way, solve this problem this way and this way. And suddenly they started to begin to have an ijma as to how this, an ijma on the common usul of how to solve the problems. Yeah, I think that's the best way of describing it. Yes, a common usul of how they solve the problem. So anyway, but it's a good question, and historians will debate these things today, and philosophers still debate these things as to why they came about. But yeah, I'll say liberalism was more gradual. Marxism was a genius guy. He's a genius. You can be genius and still be on kufr and falsehood. He's clever, right? A genius guy says, I'm going to have this radical new worldview, and he produces it, and people then start to take it, and eventually they implement it. Yeah. Okay, so there's brother in the back down there. You had your hand up. Alaikum salam.
First, I just want to say thank you.
Actually, let me just move this. I don't think we need this just yet. Just move it out the way.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us this time to actually ask these questions.
Yeah.
So, my name is Mohammed Saeed. Yeah, just so you remember. All right. So you mentioned something like to be corrected if you're wrong regarding racism in Africa. It's still there. You know, we've got different hotspots. I don't know if you know of a place called Orania. There's a place called Orania. So it's just owned by Afrikaners. You know, they have their own currency. I don't know if it's been official, but it's there. You know, and when you look at the demographics, you find that the only people that are African that are there would be the domestic workers only. You can't own anything there if you're a different skin color. And I know different hotspots, and one is from where I come from, in Richards Bay. You know, it's still there. It may not necessarily be like deliberate or obvious, you know, but it's there, sublimely so. And I doubt that racism will ever end, just like corruption. I don't think it will ever end. Just like sin, you know, as long as shaitan is still there, you know, some things are like that. But now, what would be the solution-based approach regarding this? I believe it would be open dialogues. You mentioned something about podcasts, you know, on TikTok, you know, how young people are actually getting into those platforms. So to actually have these dialogues, these questions, these topics whereby we talk and we engage on them, you know, open-endedly so, whereby people are aware that this is happening. Yeah, it is there. And also not to just play the victim card now as an African person, even amongst Africans. We also mentioned about different places in Africa where they will be, you know, hating each other. You know, even here in South Africa, our brothers from Malawi would actually agree to this, whereby they get ill-treated by Africans who are South Africans. You know, they would treat them badly. Even as we speak now, there's some campaign going on where they are trying to chase them out of the country because of they're not documented, So it's part of those social ills that are there. It's not easy to actually get rid of them, but we need to be deliberate about it. It's still out there, especially the case of Arania. That one is something it's still appalling to me how it was accepted that group of Afrikaners would just take land and then just be there and then restrict anyone, but within South Africa, So you see that bit of biasness that's taking place. And now we get the whole thing about Kill the Boer incident. That was blown out of proportion, to say the least, because they actually discovered that there are no farmers that are being killed in South Africa, Really, it was blown out of proportion. Yes, you find that the political party you mentioned, they are mischief. They're known to be causing a lot of noise, because they use that song that used to be a war cry of a sort back then, during the time of apartheid. So I needed to clarify that context that, yes, it may seem like South Africa is all rosy, from looking at it from outside, because there's a difference between what is presented to the world and what is the reality, what we are actually facing on a daily basis. One case in point as well is when our president is actually delivering a speech, he's not delivering a speech to us. His audience is the international audience. Whilst we were having the civil unrest, he never mentioned that the reason why people are rioting and there's looting was because the former president was arrested and people were so unkind to him, and then they just decided to have that upheaval and so forth. So everything he does is scripted. So I need us to be at a place whereby we understand that there's that part of the system that we are being played as a people, and the whole separatism, classicism, you find that even in a work area where people gravitate towards each other, and you find that there's a group of Indians, and then there's a group of black guys, Zulus, and then during break times they'll just chill together, and then they chill together. It's still there, it's sublime, but then you find that there are genuine brothers that actually understand that racism is like a cancerous disease, that needs to be exposed right there and then and be confronted that this is not necessary, So I just needed to touch base on that.
Okay. Barakallahu feekum. So what I said, to correct me if I was wrong, I was also jokingly saying that the current South African government, white supremacist, right? That they are, I don't know, but because I was just saying that a critical race theorist will come to South Africa and they'll look at the wealth disparity, and they'll say this means that South Africa, the power structure is still white supremacist. And I've even seen research papers. It's not really research; it's more just opinion papers, really, by critical race theorists who still argue today that South Africa is white supremacist. The power structure is, and I say, well, it's not, because unless the government, you're saying, Zuma and all these individuals are actually white supremacists, right? But is there wealth disparity that remained from a time where it was white supremacy? Yes, of course. Right? And without breaking the law, you can't redistribute the wealth and say, right, I'm going to take all your wealth and give it to the historically disenfranchised and marginalized the natives of the country. So, I understand that, but of course there's racism in South Africa, and of course I saw documentaries of they went to these white supremacist Afrikaners areas, and they spoke to the person there, and they still exist in the West. Is it West? It's in the West Africa, isn't it? West South Africa. So, I know totally, yeah, of course, that still exists. And racism exists everywhere in the world. I was very disappointed to see, but I wasn't surprised to see in Pakistan, for example. I just came from Pakistan. Pakistan actually has 5 ethnic groups, major ethnic groups anyway. You have the Punjabis, which are the ruling group, you could say. You have the Pathans, or the Pashtuns related to the Afghans, basically. You have the Sindhis in the bottom, Balochis, who are currently, there's an insurgency, some Balochis want independence because they feel that they're being persecuted and marginalized, and there's Kashmiris. There's 5 major groups, and there's a lot of ethnic-based politics between them, and it's really ridiculous. And I went down there and I was saying, like I'm saying here, Islam is a solution, right? Not your nationalism, because it's always, if it's nationalism, people say that which is the nation that should dictate the culture and character of the country. You know, the Punjabis, right? And you know that Bangladesh and Pakistan used to be one country. They used to be one country. It was all called Pakistan, West Pakistan, East Pakistan, one country. But the Bengalis were not given a proportionate vote in the Pakistani parliament, even though they were actually the majority. Right? I know Pakistan in the West is bigger than Bangladesh in terms of size, but in terms of numbers, the Bengalis are larger. But the Punjabis didn't thought that, well, you know, like we should be the ones. Well, they didn't say it like this, but like we should be the ones which are more represented in parliament than the majority group. And the Bengalis hated that, and they said we want more representation. Then the Pakistani clamped down on them, and then there was a civil war. India helped the Bengalis, and then they separated out from Pakistan. It's almost similar to what you've seen everywhere else in the world. So that's why I say you can't get rid of race-based politics, ethnic-based politics without Islam, right? And anyway, but there's a point you mentioned which I think is interesting to discuss, which is it seems like, you know, maybe in South Africa, like Indian Muslims will hang out with mostly Indian Muslims, and Indian Hindus will hang out with Indian Hindus, and whites will hang out with whites, and Malays with Malays. I've not really met many Malays when I went to Cape Town 20 years ago, but so I don't know exactly. But so like, is just hanging out with people that speak your language and know your background and culture, is that racism per se? Not exactly. I wouldn't say no. Sometimes it's easier just to talk to someone that knows your background, just as people say, "Oh, you're from my town. Oh, let's chill out. Oh, yes, this whatever. You're from my village. You're from my street. You're from my city. You're from." I've said many times. It's natural. It's nothing wrong in that per se. Just as it's nothing wrong to have different cultural-based things like clothing and food and so on, and retaining the language of the nation, your ethnic group. No problem with this. The Quran says, Allah made us to nations and tribes, that we might recognize each other. And not that, you could say the implicit is not that we are arrogant to each other or we judge each other, right? So there's no problem with that. As long as you don't separate yourself off from, let's say, in this case, from Muslims of different backgrounds and so on and so forth, or you think you're better, or you think you're inferior, right? You can't think you're inferior, you can't think you're superior, right? So just because I say, well, I enjoy talking to someone that speaks my language or my mother tongue, or what have you, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you say, no, I don't want to hang out with those guys, I don't like Somalis in Minnesota. That's a Trump reference, by the way. Trump was saying that Somalia take over Minnesota, and then the Somalis in Minnesota made a joke back and said that no, Minnesota was promised to us 3,000 years ago. They're making a Zionist. They made jokes back. It was funny, and so on. Yeah, you can't hate anyone of your brothers and sisters for their background or ethnicity or so on. But you can have preference. So when I say preference, I mean like, do I have biryani or do I eat jollof rice, which is a Nigerian dish? Yeah. You know, well, I like jollof rice better than biryani. So, oh, that's racist. No, it's my preference. Yeah, it's my preference, not a problem, right? I mean, I can't say I prefer English dishes because What is an English dish? Pizza, that's Italian, burgers, American. Yeah. Curry, as they call it. That's obviously an adapted from Salin and Masala. So anyway, yeah, but that's not racist at all. So I want to, because you referenced that, people are talking with each other and so on, and they might prefer. That's not racist per se. It's just sometimes it's just easier preference, not a problem. Yeah.
Just to add to that, an observation of mine yesterday is that I actually saw that. Yeah, we can anywhere else. Yeah, is that when I went for lunch or supper, because we are brothers together, we tolerate each other as we should be. But just to add to that point, that you can't just paint a picture of it being racist when you find people congregating together, literally.
Yeah. So as long as you don't actively, let's say, there's a chair available to sit to eat, and let's say you're Asian, and there's your black brothers around you. I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna go somewhere else. If you go out of your way, I think that anyways, but if you're simply saying, oh, I want to talk to my friend here or I want to talk to this brother because in my language or whatever, and you just, you know what, I realized that no one actually consciously thought about it, is my point. No one consciously thought about it. It just happened to be that way. But then there were cases where brothers were sitting next to each other from different backgrounds anyway. So as long as you don't say, no, I'm going to avoid these guys, I'm going to go here. No, then that as long as you don't think of it like that, then that shouldn't be any problem. Any other questions or so on and so forth?
Perhaps just to close it off with what you mentioned the other day, you having supper. You asked me about Zulu Sapila, right? And now I also found that as an antidote of a sort, whereby I myself, I was a bit skeptical when the Ethiopians came into South Africa, and they were spreading very fast, and their business model was working. There's a book I read by Chika Onyekani. It's called Capitalist Nigger, and it's very controversial.
Yeah,
Now, he was highlighting that it's not what you call me that matters, it's what I answer to, right? So now he was highlighting that there's different kinds of systems that are in place, and he said that the Indians have what we call a spider web mentality or system, whereby they are well integrated together. So if you are an Naidu, but you're not from where I'm from, but for the mere fact that you're an Naidu, I'm not going to let you suffer. So I'm going to bring you on board and help you, give you bread, and teach you, give you basically fishing rod to fish, and then you're good. Now with the Somalis and the Ethiopians, it's the same thing as well, where they have the same spider web mentality. Again, it's not racism, but it's exactly what we were talking about here. But for me to be able to understand them better is to understand their language. So I took it upon myself to learn some of those, how to greet them, just in case I'm lost in a predominantly, Ethiopian area where I can actually, and I put bread on my table, I can just greet them. I know the basics of that language. Now you find that even within KZN, it's KwaZulu Natal, and you find that just people that don't even care about the language that's from that area, But it was so impressive to actually watch the other young man, Muhammad, who was in my group, and and I spoke to him. I said, "Hey, so what?" You're good, Johnny. I'm like, okay, he knows it. You see, so I'm just highlighting that it is important because I'm also struggling with some of the languages from Malawians. I want to learn that. I think it's something that we need to think about as we grow, that at least learn a basic, from a different tribe or different race, just to, because we know Afrikaans, you know it. But you find, for example, case in point, to try and close this, I went for an eye test in Richardsburg, and when I greeted this lady in English, she responded in Afrikaans, and then I switched back. Then she went back to English. Then and then she's asking me if I know how to speak Afrikaans. I said yes. You should also learn Zulu. And her face changed red. She thought I was lying. And after that, I actually said goodbye in Afrikaans, and I could see that she was blushing now. So basically, that's the long and short of it. Yeah.
Sure. Oh no, that's very good. I mean, when I ask you that question, it's my usual policy when I go to anywhere. It's a new tribe for the Muslims, right? Muslims have a new tribe, but we're not tribalistic. Okay, so what is the Rasulullah ﷺ said? Defend your brother or help your brother, whether he's the oppressed or the oppressor. And then the Sahaba said, we understand about helping our brother if he's oppressed. How can we help him if he's the oppressor? Right? And the Rasulullah said, by stopping him from committing oppression. We're not tribalistic because we don't side with Muslims whether they're right or wrong. We only we side with the truth. And we help our brothers if they're right. And we help our brothers if they're wrong by stopping them from doing that wrong. We don't say, no, I'm going to support my tribe no matter what, right? And the word for ummah comes from a root, mother. We're more than a tribe, we're family, right? We're actually family. So we're more than tribe. We're actually a family. Go ahead.
Sorry, just trigger something. You said the word ummah comes from the word mother, right?
Yes.
In Zulu, when you say ummah, you actually say mother, my mother.
Oh, really? Must have spun like.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Sipan. Okay, so I'll leave on this. I'll leave in this final thought. So, so when whenever I meet Muslims from a different background or culture, when I went to Pakistan or Lebanon or anywhere else in the world, I thought, how do I relate to them? Because I don't have the same background to them. And you always think this the same way whenever you meet Muslims with a different background. You say, you know what, I don't know about their background, so I'm just going to relate to them as Islam says. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shake the hand, pray with them, or to eat alongside them, following the adab and akhlaq of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In this way, the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam creates an international culture. Right. So if you're basically with people from your own background and so on, you have certain customs, yes. But if you meet someone who's Muslim but from a different custom then no problem. The Sunnah is. So that's how Islam brings change your clothing, the style of the clothing, by the way. It just says make sure it covers the navel to the knee for the man and women, so on and so forth. But it simply says, okay, you can have your customs, right? And you can keep your language, no problem. And you can have the style of dress, no problem. But your family is the ummah. That is your family. And when you meet your family and you don't know how to say, what to do with them and what have you, just refer to what we have in common, which is the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you can always find, then I never feel like a stranger. Even when I was in Pakistan, I couldn't understand what people were saying. I never felt like a stranger. I felt more of a stranger in England than I did in Pakistan, surrounded by Muslims that were speaking languages I couldn't understand. So, subhanAllah, that's how Islam can solve racism and so on, because it doesn't say everyone has to follow one culture and ignore your culture. No. It simply says that, look, we have a common way to communicate, Arabic, Fusha Arabic, right? If you need that, right? And we have the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad we can all refer back to. So if I give you a gift, it's sunnah to accept, right? Whereas the different cultures might have different expectations or about this kind of stuff. Hospitality to the guests, right? We have all the same understanding of this now, right? So we have a common basis. That's how you unite. But at the same time, when you go back home and you're with people who are following, who are Muslim, but maybe they're following local customs, you can then maybe follow slightly local customs, as long as it's not against the Sunnah, of course. Yeah, but that's the beauty of Islam. It allows, because it gives you a common, as to use the Christian phrase, a common hymn sheet to all sing from, to unite us, so that we are always recognize each other as family wherever we are. Anyway, on that note, let's get some food in ourselves. Barakallahu feekum.
First time.